Good evening everybody and welcome to my channel. If you saw my last video when I took my Nikon D70 down to Eastney Ferry, that was my most popular video to date, and I really thank you for all the support you gave me on that video. It's had a lot of likes and I had literally one comment saying that they wished I'd made a comparison of how the photos looked coming out of the Nikon D70 with a more modern camera. So tonight I've come out to the beautiful Portsdown Hill up to the Nelson Monument here. I've got my Nikon D70 with me. I've also got my Nikon Z6 II. I'm going to be taking some comparison photos. I've lined up my tripod to take the same photo of the Nelson Monument behind me with both cameras. And what I'll do is when we get back home, I'll load them up onto the computer and we'll do a little bit of pixel peeping. So let's get shooting. So for the first shot here, I've got my Nikon D70 set up on the tripod. I focus it up onto the Nelson Monument here. Let me just turn that on. So I'm at, just wait for the van to go past. So I'm at f8, 640th of a second at ISO 200, which is the base on this camera. Now, the D70 doesn't have a flippy out screen and it doesn't have a very big screen, so I'm having to line this up using the optical viewfinder, which is a bit of a challenge when the camera's pointing up and you're as tall as I am. So I've got that nicely focused smack bang in the middle of my frame. Made sure I've got it perfectly vertical, and I'm just going to take a photo of that. Listen to that lovely shutter sound. Oh, that's a proper retro shutter sound, that is. Okay, right, let's swap out the camera. Oh, I forgot to say I'm at 18mm. What I'm trying to do is to match the framing on both of these cameras. So I'm at 18mm on that one, because that's an APS-C camera. If I just load up my Z6, and this one's a little bit easier because I can use the flippy out screen. I don't have to be a contortionist. Very similar framing. So this is at 24mm, which is the equivalent. Very, very similar composition and field of view. I'm again at f8. This time I'm at 320th of a second because I'm at ISO 100. Exactly the same composition with Nelson's Monument smack bang in the middle of the frame. And this has got, listen to this much quieter shutter. Nowhere near as satisfying. Okay, so we'll look at a comparison of those two photos side by side when we get back home. Beautiful evening up here, as you can see. Such a lovely little place here. Would say it's peaceful, but it's not, because it's got the road right next to it. The light's still a little bit harsh at the moment. The sun's a little bit high in the sky. Really waiting for it to get a little bit darker as the sun sets and get some nice side light. There's some wonderful grasses over on my right hand side which are shimmering in the breeze at the moment, which will look really good with some nice golden light on them. And then when the monument here starts getting bathed in light, I can check how the two cameras I've got with me perform under slightly more challenging lighting conditions. The D70 has only got an ISO rating of 200 to 1600, so it hasn't got a particularly good dynamic range. So when light gets challenging, you've got to really watch that you don't blow out your highlights, and I'm expecting the shadows to get a little bit muddy. The Z6 II, on the other hand, is an absolute powerhouse. It's got an ISO rating of 100 up to several hundreds of thousands, although I rarely take it above 3200. Yeah, so the Z6 II has got a fantastic dynamic range. You can really push the raw files in post. You can pull out a lot, you can pull down a lot of detail in the highlights that you think are blown out and there's still detail there, and you can pull the shadows up and there's really no noise. But we'll see what it looks like when we get back into the back onto the computer later. While I'm waiting for the light to go down, I thought I'd take some detail shots and try and pull out some of the texture and the text in the side of the monument. So I've got my Nikon Z6 II set up here. I'll show you what I'm looking at if I show you it on my phone. So I've got my Nikon Z6 II pointing, just looking at the bottom of the monument and trying to pull out some of the detail there. It's going to be quite a contrasty shot. I've got the bright sky either side and then the dark monument, so this is going to be a real test of dynamic range for both cameras. So first of all, with the Nikon Z6 II, I'm still at f8, I'm at 80th of a second, ISO 100. I think it's a little bit breezy here, so I'm going to use a 2-second timer. Just focus smack bang in the middle of the monument. Okay, so that's the Z6 II, and now let's put the D70 on and we'll see what that comes out like. So on my Nikon D70 I'm going to need to be at about 35mm or thereabouts to get a similar kind of framing. ISO 200 and 200th of a second, and the framing is very similar to before. Now this doesn't have a timer on here, so I'm just going to have to chance it that I don't knock the camera as I press the shutter button. Okay, there we go, and we'll compare those two when we get back. Thought I'd try a very similar shot here, but I've got right up by the railings, so I'm using the railings as kind of a foreground, looking through the railings back towards the monument. So first of all, I've got the Nikon D70 set up. It's going to take that shot first. So I'm still at f8, 200th of a second, ISO 200. Let's make sure I'm focused nicely on the monument. Oh, managed to take two there. Okay, we'll take that one off and we'll put the Nikon Z6 on. That was still at 35mm. Don't realise how reliant you get on having a tilty screen, so you don't have to be looking through the viewfinder in awkward angles. Let's try and frame it up very similar. I think I might come out around about maybe 45mm, something like that. So this is at f8, 50th of a second, ISO 100. And there we go, there's another two we can compare when we get back home. So let's tell you a little bit about the Nikon Z6 II. So it was originally released in 2020. It's a 24 megapixel sensor, backlit CMOS sensor. It's got an ISO range of 100 to 51,200, expandable up to 128,000 or thereabouts. The camera itself is a really well built camera. It's fully weather sealed, which of course the D70 never was. So it's really good in poor conditions. I've got the kit lens, which is the 24-70 f4 on there. Fantastic lens, obviously not as good as the 24-70 f2.8, but it's about a third the price and it's perfectly adequate for the kind of photography that I do. I've also got an old f-mount 50mm 1.8, which I strap on there quite often, and I really like the shallow depth of field that the 1.8 gives me. So overall, it's a fantastically well-built camera. I love using it. I love using the Nikon D70 as well, although it's getting a bit long in the tooth, but it still takes fantastic photos. It's just the Nikon Z6 II makes everything that little bit easier. You've got bracketing, you've got inbuilt inverolometer, can't even say it, inverolometer, if you want to take time lapses, which I do quite often. You can't do that with the Nikon D70. You would need to connect an external inverolometer. I'm not even sure whether it's got the port on the side that you can plug one into, quite frankly. But as I showed in the previous video, it still takes great photos, and hopefully the photos I took this evening will be just as good, but we'll see when we get home. This is going to be a fun little challenge for both cameras. So I've come over to the fence here. I'm straddling the fence of the tripod, looking over these grasses which are backlit by the sun, and there's a little tree in the middle of the meadow there. It's a lovely little scene. I've taken this before. Love this scene, especially when the sun's coming from behind, but I'm looking directly into the sun. This is going to be a real challenge to see how these cameras deal, or cameras and lenses deal, with backlit subjects and light coming straight into the lens. So first of all, I've got the Nikon D70. I really don't want to overexpose this. In fact, I'm going to underexpose it by a stop. Might actually go up to f11 just to control my shutter speed a little bit. So I'm at f11 thousandth of a second. I go into about 24 millimeters, just to cut out the fence. The sun's just at the top of the frame, which is probably the worst place it could be. And we'll see what that's like. Okay, let's swap out the cameras. So 35 millimeters. Already I can see it's handling it so much better. Or at least it looks that way from the viewfinder. I think actually I need to go into 50 millimeters to get a similar kind of framing. I'll focus here on the tree. So f8, now let's go up to f11 so it's a similar sort of depth of field. 500th of a second, ISO 100. And we'll see how that comes out. And there we go. I'll stitch those together in Lightroom when I get home, and we'll see what the shot looks like. So I'm back home again after a successful trip up to Portsdown Hill to the Nelson Monument. I'm going to be looking at the photos I took on both the Nikon D70 and the Nikon Z6 II, and doing a little bit of comparison. I'll look at the dynamic range, the noise, and the general overall colour and look of the photos. Please excuse my slightly shiny appearance today. It's nearly 30 degrees in here already. I've had to close the windows because of the road noise outside. Okay, so let's get looking at these. So for this first image here is of the Nelson Monument. This is the image I took with the D70. I haven't done an awful lot to these images. All I've done is just corrected the white balance. I don't generally tend to worry too much about setting the white balance in camera when I'm shooting in RAW, because I can always adjust that when I get back home, and quite often I'll adjust the white balance for artistic reasons. But I've just adjusted the white balance for both cameras so that they look very, very similar. And I've just pulled up the shadows a little bit on this first image. So if we look at the before image, it's quite dark in the shadows on this side of the Nelson Monument, and the edited version, you can see it's pulled up the shadows quite a bit. We're about plus 70 there, and I've just increased the contrast a little bit, given it a little bit of texture, just increased the vibrance ever so slightly. So if I just zoom into this, it's not bad. There's a reasonable amount of detail in there. There is a little bit of noise, and you can see a little bit of noise in the sky. If we have a look at the similar image from the Z6 II, very, very similar edit I've made to this. If I zoom in, you can see how much more detail you get out of that 26 megapixel or 24 megapixel sensor opposed to 6 megapixel. I can zoom in more. There's a lot more detail. There's a lot less noise. You can see there's a lot less noise in the sky there. And if I do a comparison side by side, I think I'd be happy with either one of those. The D70's held up remarkably well. Okay, so moving on to the next image. This is the one I took a little bit closer onto the monument, looking at some of the detail. You can see how much the sky's blown out here on the D70. If I pull down the highlights, And if we look at the histogram, it is completely blown out. It is more or less white, but I'm getting a little bit of cloud showing up in that left-hand corner there. That's good. The right-hand side, there's lots of detail there. I'm quite happy with that. Again, if we zoom in, it's a bit mushy. It's not sharp. I don't think that was a focusing issue. I just think that's what happens when you have a 6 megapixel sensor and an older lens. The kit lens on the D70 isn't brilliant lens. It's quite adequate, but it hasn't got the resolving power of modern lenses. And you can see there's probably just a little bit of chromatic aberration, a little bit of fringing on the light parts of the railings there. If we contrast that with the Z6 II, again, the highlights are blown out. If I just pull those down, now whether I had slightly different exposure here, it doesn't actually look as if there's as much detail in the sky there. That may be because there wasn't any detail to take, and these were a few seconds apart, and the clouds could have scooted off. But there really isn't as much detail there. So actually, I think the D70 is holding up better here. The right-hand side is comparable though. Okay, so if we zoom into the middle of the image, look how much clearer that is. You can make out we've got crispy edges there. There's no fringing. If we look down at the railings, there's no fringing or chromatic aberrations there. It's just such a more pleasing image. Again, if we look at those two images side by side, so D70 is on the right, Z6 II is on the left. We zoom into those, you can see how much difference there is. And of course, because the sensors are different sizes, I've got different resolutions, the amount I can zoom in at 200% on both of those gives me a very different framing. Okay, on to the third image. This is the image I took looking through the railings. So the first image here is the D70. Not really very much to say here. It's quite well exposed. I've got no clipping of the blacks, I've got no clipping of the whites. So actually this wasn't a particular challenge for the D70. I've still got a little bit of detail in the sky. And in actual fact, when we zoom into the monument here in the text, it's not crystal clear, but it's a lot better than it was a little bit further back. So maybe I had misfocused slightly, or the lens didn't quite focus. Here it looks a lot better. We have a look at the Z6 II. Now the framing here is slightly different. One of the issues I had with the framing is the mountings, my tripod mountings for the two cameras are in different directions. So every time I swapped the camera around, I had to readjust my ball head on the tripod to try and get the similar framing. And I never quite managed to get the framing exactly right. Here, I think also I was a little bit wider on the Z6 II than I was on the D70, so I've got a little bit more sky down either side. So probably what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crop this one in a little bit, just to see if we can get a slightly more similar framing, something like that. I'm not too worried about the blown out highlights there. We can pull down the highlights, and you can see there is a little bit of detail in there. But again, the text in the middle on the monument is crystal clear. We're getting lots of texture and lots of detail in the stonework, and that's just a much more pleasing image. So if we compare those two side by side again, here we go. On the right is the D70. On the left is the Nikon Z6. They're miles apart in terms of detail and clarity, even though I've edited them very, very similar. The D70 is a little bit darker, so maybe what we'll do is take the D70 image, just select just the D70 image, and I'm just going to push the exposure up on that one to try and match the exposure. Straight away here you can see that the highlights are blowing out. So if I pull those back down, and then we do a side-by-side comparison again. Yeah, I think I'd be happy with either of those images. Okay, and then lastly, we have this image here. Let's go back to single image view. This is the image I took over the grasses and the little tree. I love this composition. I've managed to get the tree smack bang in the middle between these two clumps of trees on the horizon line. We've got the shimmering backlit grasses, which looks really pleasing. A little bit of detail in the sky. The sun is blown out, but of course I would expect the sun to be blown out. I was looking straight into the sun. So what I'm going to do is just pull down the highlights a little bit, just so that's not blown out. There isn't any detail there. If you see, that's at 99.6% thereabouts across all three channels. I may just lift the shadows up just a little bit on this, just to brighten it up, and the sun's starting to fall apart a little bit there. If we compare that to the Z6 II image, again the sun's blown out, so we'll just pull that back. But as you can see, when I pull back the highlights, it's only affecting that. It's not affecting this foreground, which it was on the D70 image. So I don't really need to push the shadows up on this at all. Again, that is completely blown out. It's 98.6% across all three channels, but it looks so much better. There's a lot more detail in the grasses here. I didn't focus stack this, so I wouldn't really expect everything to be in focus front to back. I wasn't really worried about that. It's more about the feeling of the grasses than absolute clarity there. But if we have a look at the tree, I think there is ever so slight amount of banding on there, and the tree still looks a little bit mushy. But if I compare that to the D70 image, and again zoom in on the tree, even there without zooming in, you can see, actually that is zoomed in, you can see how mushy that is. There's not really any definition there, but you can't see the banding. Maybe that's just because, or rather you can't see the chromatic aberrations. Maybe that's just because it's not zoomed in quite as much. Okay, so in conclusion, I think both cameras held up absolutely fantastically. As I said out in the field, the Z6 II is a lot easier to use with the flippy out screen, not having to use the optical viewfinder and be a contortionist to get down when you've got high shots or awkward angles. You've got the bells and whistles like auto bracketing, you've got much better autofocus. The metering's better, the dynamic range is better, the way it handles light is better, the lens is better, but I'm still perfectly happy to use the D70 on a day-to-day basis. I had another comment on my previous video that I made at Eastney Ferry from a professional photographer. He said that back in the day he used to use the D70 for wedding photos, would quite happily produce large prints for the bride and groom, and was perfectly happy. And that's absolutely true. Back in the day, no one had 26 or 30 or 40 or 60 megapixel cameras, and everybody was perfectly happy with them. These days, I think we've got a little bit too obsessed with pixel peeping and sharpness and clarity. To be honest, all that really matters in photos is good subject, good composition, good light. Hopefully I've achieved this in these photos I've shown you today, but I've got one more bonus photo that I'm going to show you, and this is a photo I took on my Z6 II, and I actually bracketed this, so it's 3 photos taken 2 stops apart, and I've combined them into an HDR in Lightroom, and here is the final image. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any upcoming content. If you like my images or you've got any comments, please pop a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.